Thanks, everyone. Don't worry, I've got a starter slide of who I am. It's handy. But I am very aware that... Oh, we're very high-tech. I am the last slot between all of us on a coffee break, and if there is one thing I learnt during my postdoc, do not stand between postdocs and free coffee. So I will try and be quick. So a little bit about me. I did a bachelor's and master's in immunology, and then I did my PhD at the University of Leeds in England on the heterogeneity of the steroid response in glioblastoma. I carried on that work as part of a postdoc, and then in 2021, and actually it's 2 years ago today, I realised as I was sitting there, I moved to the dark side and went to Nature Communications to be an associate editor at the time. So at Nature Communications, I'm part of the cancer team, and in particular, I focus on manuscripts that have any kind of cancer omics aspect, particularly those with a translational aspect, so things like biomarkers, predictions of response, and things like that. So the eternal question, what makes a Nature paper? It's the most significant advances that have the widest implications, and it's a big shoes to fill. Something like the EWS Fly1 translocation, something like that. And its significance should also be readily appreciated by non-specialists. And it should be applicable across different disciplines. But as I said, that's a high bar. And a lot of research that doesn't fit in Nature will end up in a Nature research journal. But again, this is an almost equally high bar. It's advances within the discipline that it covers. And again, it should be of interest not just to the people in one particular cancer type, for instance. It should also be appreciated by other people who study other cancers. And the Nature research journals, the ones probably most relevant to this audience, would be things like Nature Cell Biology, Nature Cancer, Nature Methods, Nature Neuroscience. But we still have the problem that there is only very limited space in Nature and the Nature research journals, which means that only the most important research with the widest implications can be published, as there is a direct competition for physical space in the manuscript or in the journal itself. So there are lots of wonderful manuscripts where the area of research, the principal appeal is to other specialists within the same area. And we like to think that that's where we come in at Nature Communications. So we try to report significant advances that have the potential to influence thinking in a field, that have new insights or new ideas. It doesn't have to have as broad appeal as a Nature Cancer paper. We just want it to have great science with an aspect of novelty. Nature Communications was first launched in 2010. It's online only, so we publish articles every day. We have no space constraints in the journal. And it was the first fully open access journal at the Nature portfolio since 2015. And we have offices in London, Shanghai, New York, Berlin, and Madrid, and we're opening a couple more every year at the minute. And whether it's Nature, Nature research journals, or Nature Communications, they're all run by large in-house teams of professionals. So at Nature Communications, we have about 140 full-time professional editors. But we also have our magazine editors, so people that look at front half content, so news and views and perspectives. We have the art editors that make the beautiful images in the Nature Reviews journals. And we also have an entire team of editorial administration. And I wanted to give a bit of background on the editorial process, and this is true whether we're talking about the Nature journals, Cell Press, Elsevier. It's all handled in pretty much the same way. So as an author, you submit your manuscript, you click submit and walk away from the computer. That then gets flown over to our chief editor, who looks at all of the manuscripts that are submitted every day and assigns it to a handling editor, which is me. And we then are responsible for all the decisions from that point on, so whether it's rejection, peer review, revise, or accept. So when you want to publish, before you hit the submit button, it's worth thinking about where you're going to submit to. It's worth thinking about how big your story is. And there is no right or wrong answer to this question. My own PhD research was very specific. And I knew that it wasn't of interest to people outside of my own field. And what audience do you want to reach? And again, there's not a right or wrong answer, but who do you want to read your research? Who do you think will act on the research that they read? The other thing is how fast do you want to get it out? So generally, the higher the impact, sometimes the longer the review process takes, but it depends. And is open access important? And does your work build on recent papers within a specific journal? And it could be that they are really interested in a particular aspect of that cancer research, and you might want to have your paper fitting in with the research that you're building on. So when you're submitting your paper, think about your main message. For your initial submission, and I think this is true for a lot of publishing houses, it doesn't necessarily need to look perfect. It doesn't have to be in the perfect Nature style. But think about things like double-blind peer review. If you want to be double-blind, don't mention the name of your institute in your method section, things like that. And familiarise yourself with the editorial and publishing policies before submission. And this can be things like data availability. Is it a prerequisite for publication, and are you able to do that? And always, if you can, include a cover letter to your editor. If you write it, we will read it. So your cover letter is basically your elevator pitch. So it's the 3-minute version that you have perfected of your manuscript. You get to explain the importance of your findings and put it in context of recent work. Also, feel free to put in reviewer suggestions and exclusions. Sometimes people think this is a bit presumptuary. It's absolutely not, and it really helps. But try and limit them to about 3 or 4. There is once a case of someone who tried to exclude the whole of Germany as a reviewer. It didn't work. Mention any related papers that you currently have that are in submission and how they relate to your current paper. So your handling editor will receive your paper and they will try and guide you through the editorial process. They will read your full manuscript and we will decide whether to send it out to peer review, and this is often done in consultation with other editors in the team. Most papers will be seen by more than one editor. We might ask for some additional information, so it could be details of a clinical trial, it could be ethics information, things like that. And Nature communications, at least, we aim for all initial decisions within a week. This goes up to about 10 days at Christmas, but generally, we're pretty fast. And to be a strong contender for review, we look for an important question within the field that's something new and interesting and has a definitive conclusion. So the field will be different based on the conclusion that you've put at the end of that work. And no, citations aren't everything. I don't know how many citations the papers I publish get. I don't look at it. We're looking for papers that matter, even if they don't have the highest citation potential. And we're looking for papers that we can kind of nurture through the process if we can. But the thing is, most papers, at least in Nature Communications, are rejected without peer review. A lot of the time, it's because it's out of journal scope, although this is less true for Nature Communications, or that there are similar findings in the published literature. And a lot of the time, this comes down to editorial decision: is the novelty sufficient? Sometimes it's because there's a lack of direct experimental support for some of the key conclusions. So if you're outlining a mechanism, we want to see that every stage of that mechanism has been outlined. Ethical concerns or essential criteria that's missing. So all of our scientific content is peer-reviewed. We will try and pick peer reviewers that can evaluate the paper in an unbiased way, which is why we look for conflicts of interest. But ultimately, the decision will be made by the editor and not the reviewer, and we are not here to count votes. And a question I get a lot is, why are reviewers anonymous? Generally, we see that the reviews, when they're anonymous and anonymous, aren't that different, but sometimes it can help avoid awkward moments at conferences. So if you have ripped into your colleague's paper during the peer review process, it's a bit awkward to then meet over coffee at a conference. And it also helps to correct for power imbalance. So you can imagine as a postdoc, if you were invited to review a manuscript from the biggest person in your field, if you're honest and you knew that they would know who you are, you might write a nicer report. But we also offer double-blind peer review for all of our titles, if you would rather also be anonymous. What we do have is transparent peer review. So this doesn't mean that your name will be published, but your report will. This is an anonymized referee report, and it basically shows you the process that the manuscript has gone through to get to the point where it's been published. Now, we will take out any confidential information, any data that hasn't been published yet. That's absolutely fine. But it's now a requirement to publish at least a version of this with Nature Communications. And this can be quite useful as well if you're getting used to the peer review process. If you can find some of these files on papers that you're interested in, you can maybe see how much work has been done with the revision or what particular points the reviewers asked for, if it's something that's similar to your own work. And when we're choosing reviewers, we try and get people who have technical expertise and knowledge of the field. They don't have to have previously published with our journal or journals within the Nature family. We like them to have good attention to detail and a big picture view. So we also were trying to get some specific comments. So I've been talking to people and saying, I've had reviewers that have just written recommend, reject. And that is not in any way helpful for the authors or for me. We want some kind of prescriptive talking through of what they feel about the paper. We're always trying to increase our reviewer pool, and we will always honour your author exclusions if it's people that you feel have an ongoing similar project. And we try to involve as many reviewers as needed and no more. So the standard is 2 to 3 reviewers per manuscript. And what we ask the reviewers is to tell us whether they feel that the conclusions are supported, the data is high quality, and it's an advance over previous work. And they can also sort of advise on if it's of interest to the field. So for instance, quite often we'll have a clinical researcher on a paper that's to do with biomarkers, for instance, to tell us whether they think that it would be clinically applicable. But ultimately, we take the responsibility for the decisions, good and bad, and we do overrule reviewers if we feel that they have been unreasonable, but we do try and uphold our standards wherever possible. So best case scenario, you've submitted your manuscript, it's sent out to review, and you're asked to submit a revision. Always aim to address the major issues, and your editor quite often will flag what they think are the most important issues within the letter that you get back. And we're trying to avoid ineffective revision cycles. So this means that even if you think that you could maybe get away with not including an experiment and they might not notice, just bear in mind that there is a chance that it will lead to another cycle of revision. Also, if you're ever concerned, do consult with your editor. So most of the calls I have with authors are actually at the revision stage because they want my advice or a bit of guidance on how they can particularly address comments. And that's something that as well we can then feed back to the reviewers. So as part of that revision, you get the reviewer reports and resubmit only after you have done all of the experiments. I cannot tell you how often we get a revision back and they say, we have one final experiment that's currently in progress and we'll fill it in as soon as we've got the results. We have to send it back. We're sorry, but we do. And expect that it's going to be read both by the reviewers and by the editor. And I shouldn't have to say this, but always try and make your point-by-point response diplomatic. If you do not agree with a reviewer, that is absolutely fine. Just tell us why. You would be amazed. So the other worst case scenario is that we send it for review and it ends up having a rejection. A lot of the time, this is because the findings aren't novel, but it can also be that there are significant technical concerns, and this is the most common reason that we reject. The results might not be significant enough for the field, or quite often it may be that in order to address the reviewer's comments fully, we feel that it's outside the scope of a revision. So we expect a revision to be about 3 months on average, and if they have asked for an entirely new data set, to set up in an entirely new hospital to get a new patient cohort, you will not be doing that in 3 months. So we are not going to ask that as a revision. But if you feel the decision is wrong, always, always consider if it's worth an appeal. So reasons to appeal can be that you have additional data that was essential for the study that you didn't include in the first version, or you've got during the process of the revision. If there are any factual errors in the reviewers or the editor's comments, again, be professional, be diplomatic, but come and show us evidence of that. Or if you have specific, concrete evidence of reviewer bias, and again, this is incredibly rare, and would require you to know who the reviewer is, and I will tell you, no one has ever guessed a reviewer's identity correctly with me. But if there are factual things that you think could change the decision, it is absolutely in your best interest to appeal. When it's not the best choice is if there are subjective disagreements about the significance of the work, because quite frankly, it's hard to prove in either direction. But when you're putting together an appeal, if it's after review, treat it as a revision. Present the new data that you have, create a point-by-point response as you would for a revision, and discuss how your findings extend on previous work, even if the reviewers have said that it's not novel, explain how it adds to what they've already identified. Don't make unsubstantiated claims of bias. Don't rely on reputation, because we don't generally look at authors' titles, affiliations, and things like that, except if there's a conflict of interest. And don't simply rewrite the paper, so there should be new data in there. But always remember, and again, this isn't just Nature, this is all of the journal services, we have a manuscript transfer system for a reason. And it's usually because as editors, we talk to the other journals. So we know what the other journals in the portfolio are looking for. And if we suggest somewhere to transfer to, it's because we think that it would be a good fit. You're not obliged to take it up, but it's worth considering. Generally, once the work has got to accept, our production team take over. They will copy edit, lay out figures. This stage always takes longer than it should. Try and have patience. And they will then take over in promoting the paper through Twitter and various social medias that I don't really understand. But final point, if you take nothing else from this seminar, as postdocs and PhD students, connect yourself with an ORCID ID. It takes 5 minutes, but it's useful going forward, especially if you want to stay within academia. You can have it as part of your registration if you do a peer review, even in association with your PI, and you can get credit there. And it's also useful when you're looking to apply for other academic positions. So, takeaways, get your main message across and know what that message is, which is not always the one that you thought it would be when you started the project. We're generally looking for papers with potential, and this isn't just Nature Communications. But if in doubt, an appeal is always an option, and look at other options within the portfolio if you think it's suitable for your paper. Finally, I've talked to a few people over the past few days that want to know how to become an editor. It's through the website. It's a long interview process, but we are a surprisingly friendly bunch, and we're all still scientists underneath it all. So if it's something that you're interested in, feel free to come and find me or drop me an email. So with that, I will finish, and yeah, happy to hear questions, concerns.